time in the next Parliament. And if the growth Labour is banking on does not materialise, then manifesto promises will have to be broken. No return to austerity, get debt falling, no increases to taxes on working people. Some of these will have to give.
Joel giving us all the details we need for our next discussion there. We can dive a little deeper into it with Emma Reevy, Chief Executive of the Trussell Trust, Rain Newton-Smith, the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, and Nick Gray, the founder of GTEC. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. I suppose I might just go down the line. First of all, this has been an historic night. From each of your own perspectives, what are you feeling at this point?
That we have the opportunity for urgent change now. We've heard a lot from the new Prime Minister about long-term plans, but now we need to understand what's going to change immediately for people who are facing the most hardship. Highest numbers of people ever having to come to food banks. We can't afford to wait for long-term economic change. So what's the plan from today? I'm encouraged to hear Keir say that the work is urgent and it starts today. So we want to know what that will look like for people on the lowest incomes.
Indeed. Rain, what was your take on what you've heard so far?
So I think share that sense of urgency. I think we've seen the Prime Minister has the mandate. I think now it's about using that as the mission to deliver sustainable economic growth. And that means working in partnership with business. The vast majority of that growth must come from private sector investment. That's what will help to fund our public services. And so he needs to be brave and he needs to be bold. And that is about making sure we are building the houses we need so we have affordable housing. That means brave decisions on planning, making sure that we prioritise some of the strategic investments and infrastructure we need to see in this country. And the business leaders that I've been speaking to say, make those decisions around grid connectivity and grid capacity. That's how we make sure that we can really make the most of our green growth and that transition to a net zero economy. There's so much opportunity there, which should deliver energy efficiency and bring down some of the cost of living pressures on ordinary households. And also use the moment to step into our international leadership. There's a real moment for us to set out a vision for the UK and to attract trade and investment from around the world so we can really help to alleviate some of the pressures that households have been feeling in recent years.
Nick Gray, you're inventor, founder of the GTEC cordless vacuum company. I mean, you're at the absolute sharp end of understanding where investment counts, where a more benign environment counts. What's your thought at this point?
It's uncertainty. So, it's a long time since we've had a Labour government. I don't think people are very clear on what they really stand for and what's going to happen next. For us, we just want ordinary people to be well off and confident. So then they buy their vacuum cleaners and things. I think home ownership has been persecuted a little bit in recent decades, all parties really, and I'd like to see an encouraging atmosphere for people to buy and own their own homes. I think that leads to a lot of satisfaction. More vacuum cleaner sales as well, which we don't mind about. But I think people feel good when they know what they're working towards. I think people are a little bit lost and they're not sure where they belong in a modern society. And what we've got is a huge majority of seats, but a tiny percentage of the vote. I think 1 in 5 people voted for this government. So a lot of people either didn't vote or they just picked a vote off the wall because they don't really know what to expect. And I think as a consumer or as a citizen, I'm like that as well. I'm not sure what to expect next.
The people that you support, thank you all three for your opening thoughts on that. I mean, the families that the Trussell Trust supports are absolutely at the sharp end of the most pressing questions in terms of household support, making sure that people have got stable family home lives. I mean, I was struck by the fact that you said it's urgent, it needs to happen. You see people in emergency day in, day out with the Trussell Trust. One of the things that the new Prime Minister said was that I can't just flick a switch. So there is, that's what I suppose is going to be interesting. For those who are at the sharp end like you are, it's an emergency.
Yeah. It is, and we were encouraged to see in Labour's manifesto a commitment to ending the mass distribution of emergency food aid, but we recognise that that will take time. But there are things that can happen now, and we need urgent action now. Winter is coming. We're seeing food bank numbers increase still. Last year, our highest numbers ever. For people on the lowest incomes facing that hardship, they need an intervention now. We know the Household Support Fund is coming to an end in September. That's vital funds that have been providing crisis support for people. There's no cost of living payments planned for this winter, and yet for people on the lowest incomes, costs are still too high and people can't afford the essentials. So we need urgent action to extend that Household Support Fund, to create a minimum, at least in universal credit, to ensure people have enough money to get through the next few months whilst working towards a longer-term plan for ending the need for food banks.
And presumably as well, that question about the child benefit cap that was raised again and again and again. Labour said in that campaign that we will have a strategy. Can you have a strategy without addressing that, do you think?
No, we need to be working towards that. 30% of the families we see have 3 or more children. We're seeing a significant overrepresentation of families with children in our food banks. We need to be tackling these caps.
There is a big question too about investment. The new Prime Minister talked about the new GB Energy vehicle that is going to be used to encourage green investment. We know that the incoming Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, we're expecting to see very shortly arriving in Downing Street, is going to be holding a conference, a summit for business within the next couple of days. It's how quickly you can engage and convince, presumably. Have they rolled the turf well enough in both of your views?
Well, I think the Labour Party have been talking about being pro-business, wealth creation, and I think that's really important. But we also need to see that investment. You're absolutely right, and that is about thinking about having a net zero investment plan, so really making the most of... You can't be pro-growth without being pro-green. That's what so many business leaders have said to me. We have such a consensus, and we've been such a leader, and there's such an opportunity for us to continue to lead in offshore wind and onshore wind. But it will take being brave and bold. And I think also, to Emma's point, we also need to think about some of the housing associations within our membership say we need to also think about how we help and support people in work and being in work. And that's thinking about how we look at childcare provision. And I think the Labour Party in their manifesto set out some important commitments on extending some of that provision. But that is something we all need to focus on, is how we help and support people in work to create the opportunities and growth.
And with a female Chancellor, there's a chance that might have a different emphasis. Just your thoughts on the investment, Nick. And also, I suppose, the big question for a lot of small businesses too. You will have risen up through the ranks when you were building your business. You know the pressures on small business. It's not just about these big employers with a big net ability to provide scaled employment. It's those people who are taking risks.
Yeah, and it is difficult. I mean, a few years ago, there was a dearth of development land, for instance, and our local councils worked hard to make some available. You get the R&D tax fund, which is very good, encourages Britain at what we're best at, which is inventing and creating intellectual property. And whilst the governments have taken care of businesses reasonably well, I mean, I think we all know that the only wealth that's created comes from businesses, and small businesses contribute a lot of that. So to look after business is essential, but to look after the population looks after the businesses. So although the corporation tax is fairly affordable, it's really the state of people's minds and their levels of happiness and their confidence that makes a huge difference to the businesses, which generate the wealth for everybody. So the situation's okay for business. What we need is for the population to feel safe and secure and confident. A lot less talk of wars and things and upsets and crises would be helpful. But it feels sometimes, and I think Emma was saying earlier, that a lot of people start with mental uncertainty and end up with in peril from earning a living and taking care of themselves and end up not able to look after themselves. So it's really giving people the confidence that the future's going to be okay. You know, they've set things okay for business. There's things to help us. I don't rely on government funding and things. I always like to take care of my own stuff and think if I look after my people and my staff that everyone will be okay. But sorry, yeah.
Well, thank you for all of your insights. It's amazing how it all interlocks, isn't it? Whichever part of people's finances or security or economics that you're talking about, their businesses. Thank you, all three of you, for coming to join us to talk about that. We're going to take a short break. Don't go anywhere. Nigel Farage is preparing to speak. You won't miss that. We'll see you in a moment.
To Night Talk.
We have a new caller.
You're live on air, Tony.
27 years loyal service, so they could just throw me on the scrappy.
I hear you.
You're amongst friends.
There is a genuine bond between me and my audience. It feels like two old mates putting the world to rights.
You're a liar. This is the last broadcast you'll ever give.
The Night Caller, a brand new 4-part drama. This July on Channel 5 and My5.
Say a big hello to the Sterling Homes Summer Sale with fabulous savings in-store and online. Plus this weekend only, an extra 5% off everything.
At Amazon, we offer employees up to £8,000 towards training and career growth. So you can learn new skills you never thought you'd have.
Kickoff is coming, so keep it simple with pizza and beer. 2 pizzas, 4 drinks for £6.
Get in! But what to choose? I'll just get a mix. Margarita, meat feast, Texas barbecue, beer and cokes. That should keep everyone happy. Ugh, we're gonna need a bigger basket. Scotland, that's handy.
The Scottish Festival of Motoring is back this July with a huge variety of vehicles on display, including a variety of cars, motorcycles and so much more. Live car and bike stunt shows, music stages, a free kids zone. It's the perfect day out that the whole family can enjoy. Advance tickets on sale now or pay at the gate.
To own a home at Kingdom Park is to experience a whole new way of living, where there's a real sense of a community, surrounded by natural beauty, and where there's a place for every occasion. Discover luxury holiday home ownership, less than 1 hour from Glasgow and Edinburgh, and find a home for every budget and every lifestyle. We look forward to welcoming you. Kingdom Park Homes. Your kingdom awaits you.
At Art Windows and Doors, we believe that quality should come as standard. And that's not just for our excellent range of windows and doors, but for our service and price too. With over 9 out of 10 on Check a Trade, our quality, price and service speak for themselves. Visit us online or at our showrooms in Glasgow and Paisley. And don't forget to ask for your Central Scotland discount.
On a waiting list for cataract surgery and suffering with poor vision? Have your treatment within weeks with Optical Express. Get back to the things you love and live life to the fullest once again. Call or go online today to book your free consultation. Optical Express.
Optical Express.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of the aftermath of an historic election victory for Labour. Lots still going on this afternoon. We're keeping a keen eye on Downing Street, where the new Prime Minister is beginning to form his new government. We heard his speech earlier, and of course he's already hard at work. We're also expecting to hear from Nigel Farage. Libby Vina's in Downing Street. A bit of calm there after the crowds were ushered in for the new Prime Minister's arrival, but some pretty substantial work to be done this afternoon, assembling that new cabinet as fast as possible.
Yes, Keir Starmer said that he wanted to roll up his sleeves and get on with it, and I think that's exactly what he's doing. The new cabinet will not just be a Labour cabinet as opposed to a Conservative one. It will look very different in other respects because it's likely that at least 2 of the top offices of state will be occupied by women. One of them, of course, Rachel Reeves, who's expected to be made Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, she probably has the most difficult job of any members of the cabinet, apart from the Prime Minister, because of the state of the economy. And I have to say that Jeremy Hunt, the outgoing Chancellor, looked rather chipper as he posed on the doorstep of number 11 this morning with his family and their dog before leaving. Perhaps that's because he was somewhat relieved, firstly, to have actually won his seat, and secondly, that perhaps he no longer had the responsibility of looking after the nation's finances, but that responsibility now is expected to fall to Rachel Reeves. At the Home Office, it's expected that Yvette Cooper will be in charge. Now, she is one of the few people who have actually got experience of government. She served under the last Labour governments. There are a handful of others who have experience of government, but for the most part, those walking into number 10 this afternoon will be newcomers, as it were. They will have had no experience of government, and so they will be on a very steep learning curve. I expect they'll all be briefed immediately by the permanent secretaries in their various departments, but as I say, a very steep learning curve for some of them.
Thank you very much indeed, Libby. We're just getting some news that there is a recount, Basildon South and East Thurrock. We did have a shot of some of the activity there a few moments ago. We're just hearing that Reform may actually have taken another seat there. Paul's just been taking a quick look at this, and of course both of you will have been tracking all of this throughout the night. What can you tell us, Paul?
Yeah, so there's a couple of seats relating to Thurrock, and Labour took one last night. The other one, South Basildon and East Thurrock, went to the wire, essentially, 127 votes in it. Reform were actually ahead. Labour demanded a recount. This was all going on until about 6 o'clock in the morning when the returning officer there said, look, let's just break, let's go home, have a nap, come back. So they're going to start that recount this afternoon. But if Reform UK do take that seat, it would be their 5th seat in the Parliament. James McMurdoch is the candidate there hoping to take that seat for them. Obviously, Labour will be hoping that the original count was incorrect and that they can overturn that original lead by Reform UK and take that seat too.
Oh, it's just fascinating, isn't it? Because we know that Reform has had an enormous impact on the result across the country, pretty much, but also making these breakthroughs. So we know Reform are in 2nd place in so many constituencies. So these are very, very... it's over 98. I would expect it to be quite considerably higher, actually. In 2015, UKIP was in second place in over 120 seats. So I think it's going to be higher. We'll definitely check. But these are the kinds of constituencies where Reform UK have taken MPs last night. These are the areas where you look at the Leave vote in the referendum and it's above 70%. And so this is precisely the kind of area where Reform UK have been making gains. And if they do, obviously that will be their 5th MP. We had a projection at the very beginning of last night that Reform could take up to 12 MPs. That's obviously come down significantly, but 5 is from 0. It's an enormous result for Reform UK.
It's a big breakthrough. And I asked
it's a really big breakthrough.
Apologies, Jane. I asked Keir Starmer during the campaign whether he was a bit complacent about the rise of Reform, because I think originally when Reform came on the scene, Labour was sort of licking their lips thinking, fantastic, this is going to punish the Conservatives, it's going to help us win a majority. But if you think 5 years down the line, at the next general election, if Labour haven't delivered significant change, well, Reform may well be one of the main forces in British politics holding their feet to the fire.
Yeah, and he was explicit about that overnight, wasn't he? He said, Labour, we're coming for you. I mean, he just spelled it out in his acceptance and victory speech when he got his seat last night, just so we can make sure our viewers know that we're keeping a very close eye on this central London, Westminster location. We're expecting to hear from Nigel Farage in the next few moments. It was that point in the campaign when we sort of look back over these 6 weeks, and goodness knows there were plenty of lowlights and some in all sorts of things up and down in terms of the Conservative campaign. A lot of very difficult questions for that, and one of the things that made things extra difficult, that changed things for the Conservative campaign, was that moment when Nigel Farage decided to engage decided to take leadership of his party and throw his hat back in.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the defining moment, really, for the Conservative Party. The whole election, there were all sorts of calamitous moments, you know, when announcing the election in the rain, the D-Day issue, and then the gambling saga that dragged on for days. But I think in terms of moments...
Sorry, we're going to take you straight... We're going to go we can take you straight to Downing Street and we can see what we are assuming is the new Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner.
A grandmother walking up there to Downing Street at the age of 45 years old, a former care worker. This is not your average politician. She's very proud of that background. She speaks about it very regularly, and I'm sure she will do as Deputy Prime Minister. This is a fascinating role in politics because, assuming she is about to become Deputy Prime Minister, we've got no reason to think otherwise, it's not actually an official constitutional role. It's sort of a made-up role, really, a made-up title. And so everyone who does that job does it slightly differently, depending on the dynamics. She'll probably be a bit of a John Prescott, I'd imagine. If you think that Keir Starmer's more to the centre of the party, she'll be trying to reach out to the left of the party. But that is going to be a fascinating dynamic. And we know that they do often fall out, those two.
Well, absolutely. I was about to say, I mean, there is a woman that can actually still hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire on a lot of issues, and she is kicked back from being moved on more than one occasion when he's been trying to shape his shadow cabinet and his administration.
And the difference between a Labour administration and a Conservative one is the Deputy Prime Minister, the Deputy Leader of Labour, has a direct mandate from the members. So she's got every right to hold Keir Starmer's feet to the fire and to stand up to him. She's got her own mandate, which is obviously a different dynamic under the Conservatives, which is a political appointee. They don't have a direct mandate from the members.
I mean, it is quite striking. People will often look at the Labour Party and say, yeah, but they've never had a woman leader, they've never had a female leader. But around this Prime Minister, there are significant, very powerful female figures.
Yeah, and, you know, when we looked at, like, how people see the parties in terms of the gender split, we can see that just slightly more women are prefer the Labour Party to men. The biggest gender split being on the reform vote, actually, with men being more likely to support reform than women. But it's hugely significant, I think, when women see women in office, they see women in leadership positions. If we need to get, we need to get more women into politics, and this is one of the ways that you can do it.
Alongside me, as you may have spotted on one of the wide shots from our studio, we've been rejoined by Nicola Sturgeon, who joined the overnight election team. And Nicola Sturgeon, I'll talk to you very specifically about the calamity that has faced the SNP overnight. But actually, it is worth bringing you in when we're talking about women in leadership positions, women in politics. We've got the highest number of women coming into Parliament. That's a really powerful image, isn't it, to see Angela Rayner, whatever your own politics.
Oh, I think it's fantastic, and I think to see Rachel Reeves become the first Chancellor in history, one of the great offices of state, is going to be a truly special and historic moment. It does make a difference to younger women, and that's important at the best of times, but this is a tough time for women and other minorities in politics with all the toxicity that pours out of social media. So I think this is important, and good luck to all of them. We're different parties, but I wish them the best.
And what difference does she make to the politics of the way that Keir Starmer might run his government?
I think that's going to be really fascinating. I think Paul's point is important, which is similar in the SNP. Deputy Leader is directly elected by the members, so she has a mandate in her own right. How she chooses to exercise that is up to her. But from what I've seen of Angela Rayner, she will do that with some gusto. And I think that may be one of the most interesting things about the dynamic of the new government, the extent to which she pulls it a bit more to the left, which I hope she does. And I guess encourages Keir Starmer to deliver for some of the people that during the campaign he seemed to ignore. The lifting of the two-child cap, for example. Hopefully that will be one of the policies that in fairly early course Labour shifts direction on.
She was noticeably deeply uncomfortable.
I think you could feel the discomfort of many Labour figures in Scotland. Gordon Brown, for example, who champions rightly the issues of child poverty, but trying to do that while defending the retention of the two-child cap. You could feel it was palpable, the discomfort that was coming from key Labour figures.
Yeah, we're going to keep it. It's going to be a bit of a switch around, I think, depending on what happens next. I think Libby was there to witness that moment too. Just give us your thoughts on seeing Angela Rayner walking up Downing Street in that incredible green suit, going through number 10. They've all had to keep a lid on so much you know, they must have felt the sort of nerves in the anticipation of this moment. But here we are. We've seen her go through that door with this potential extraordinary title.
Yeah, we often talk about social mobility, but Angela Rayner is the living incarnation of that. Having left school at 16 with no qualifications, she became a single mum, and then she became a care worker before getting into the trade union movement and beginning a career in politics. She is, as you've been talking about, a very powerful figure in the Labour Party, having been elected in her own right. But I think we have to be cautious about exactly how much power she exercises at the moment, because this very moment is when any Prime Minister is at the point where they exercise maximum power to do what they want. And I think some Prime Ministers in the past maybe haven't used that power as wisely as perhaps they should have done. But I think Keir Starmer will be very mindful that he is in the most powerful position he is likely ever to be in. And of course he does have that huge mandate, that huge majority, which puts him in a very strong position as well. But Angela Rayner, as we've seen, is one of the most colourful, one of the most powerful figures in the Labour movement. And I think he is going to have to listen to what she wants in terms of the direction of policy. She is going to have to take note of that. And of course, she was very close to Jeremy Corbyn. And that's important. He's back in Parliament as well. And there are a number of MPs on the left in the party who, on issues like Gaza, on issues like child poverty, do believe that the leadership needs to go a lot further than he did in opposition. All that said, you have to remember that Keir Starmer was not a centrist Labour politician originally. He was a man on the left. He did also serve under Jeremy Corbyn. So I think we can perhaps sometimes make too much of these tribal loyalties. I think what he's trying to show, and what he will try and show today, is that he wants to get rid of that sort of factionalism in the Labour Party. He wants to bring the party together so that they can actually deliver in terms of what they have promised to the public.
OK, I know you'll keep a close eye on the comings and goings there in Downing Street, as you have since 9:30 this morning for us, Livy. For the moment, thanks very much indeed for that. That's the wider shot, of course. It is quite the walk up Downing Street, isn't it? That has been, I mean, for those of us who've watched elections for so many years, there's so many memories of people on that walk with the photographers yelling at them and the press. It must get the heart rate up when you're in that situation.
I mean, just on a personal level, if it's okay to talk about that.
Yeah,
but, you know, as somebody who analyses elections, you know, these, and we do that in a data-based way, and we look at surveys and data, but these personal stories on this day after the election are always utterly riveting. And, you know, it's kind of spine-tingling to see our democracy in action. I know that sounds really cheesy, but for someone who's very passionate about politics and about democracy and about the functioning of a democracy, it's just... I'm basically a passionate nerd. Yeah. But it's a privilege to watch this unfold and to be here.
Yeah, and how peaceful it is. And
how consensual it is. How last night, when we watched the concession speeches, how there was so much decency, there was so much acceptability of this is what's going to happen, lots and lots of really dignified concessions, and that is something that we can't take for granted.
Yeah, and both of those leaders, actually, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, have both been very, very decent about each other today, and that's incredibly encouraging, and not something actually we've seen a lot of in politics over the past few years. Certainly Boris Johnson's departure speech was very tetchy. Liz Truss still claims that she was forced out by other forces at work. So it is refreshing, actually, to see two politicians do a very respectful handover of power.
It really was.
Yeah, indeed. We're keeping a close eye, too, on this rather functional-looking room. There are plenty of those in politics, aren't there, waiting for the arrival of Nigel Farage. Presumably he'll be keeping a very close eye on the story we were just outlining for you there in Basildon South to see whether the Reform may have taken another seat. And whilst we think about all these personal stories of those who might walk up Downing Street into those cabinet positions this afternoon, the personal journey of the man we're about to hear from, too, worth remarking on. I mean, you know, at eighth attempt, he's got his seat in Parliament. And, you know, when those new MPs are sworn in next week and when we get used to just seeing this new Parliament laid out before us, you know, seeing Nigel Farage in there is going to be quite a moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the most recognisable politicians in the country. He's a household name, and he's certainly going to shake things up in Parliament. I mean, he's going to be able to ask questions at Prime Minister's Questions, the way they do the kind of rotation there. He won't ask a question every week, I shouldn't imagine, but he's going to be there chipping in, and that is a whole other ballgame for them. And for Reform UK, it is such a foothold in order to establish themselves as a party of legitimacy and respectability to potentially go on and grow in future elections, Jane.
I'd still question, though, the claim that he's making that they're going after Labour voters next. So they're splintering the Conservative Party, they're taking voters from the Conservative Party. But if you look at what Labour's coalition is, it's fundamentally a coalition of Remainers. It's a coalition of working-aged adults rather than retirees. It's a coalition of people that are very disinclined to support the kinds of policies and positions that Reform UK will be advocating. It will also be interesting to see, as a unit, if there are 4 or 5 MPs, how cohesive they can be as a unit, because they haven't had to do that before.
OK, we'll just pause there because I think we can speak to Harry Horton now, who's been with the Reform UK campaign all the way through and will be watching this with enormous interest, of course. Harry, I think you've just spoken to Nigel Farage in the last few minutes. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we have just spoken to him and Lee Anderson, the two of them sitting down together for the first time as MPs and chatting to us. And look, I mean, it's fair to say I think they're both in a pretty good mood. Nigel Farage told me that if you'd asked him 6 weeks ago if he would have got 4, possibly 5 MPs elected to Parliament, more than 4 million votes, he would have bitten your hand off. He is delighted at this result today. He did tell me that he thinks these allegations of racism, misogyny, homophobia surrounding some Reform candidates that we've seen in the past few weeks may have cost them some votes towards the end of this election. He thinks that actually they didn't quite achieve the performance overnight that he had hoped they might do. But nevertheless, as Paul was just saying, their performance, these 4, perhaps 5 MPs that they've got, gives them that platform now to go on over the course of this next Parliament, to try and grow, to try and become, as they hope, the main opposition party heading into the next election. So this is a huge moment for Nigel Farage.
Campaign coordinator for Labour in this general election, a man who will...
Sorry, just hold it there, Paul. We were just crossing over pictures waiting for Harry to finish. Paul, take it away.
Apologies.
We just saw Pat McFadden going into number 10.
Pat McFadden, yes, campaign coordinator going into number 10 there. Of course, he's just overseen what many would argue is a very, very successful campaign by the Labour Party, a very cautious campaign. There weren't many sparks in it, were there? But my goodness, they managed to carry that Ming vase all the way to number 10, as Keir Starmer has previously described it. So I'd imagine he will be getting a very significant role in that team, possibly some kind of cabinet office type role where he'll be a bit of a fixer at the heart of government. Prime Ministers often like to have that kind of character overseeing the cabinet office for them because it's a very unwieldy department where you've got to keep kind of spider's web of different departments under your thumb. And who's this coming up, number 10, Downing Street now? Is that... Oh, no, that's just a security officer. I'm getting far too excited at this time in the afternoon.
Yeah, hold your horses, Paul.
I did think it was a little bit too soon for someone else to be going in.
Yeah, this will all be being coordinated, timings-wise, of course. I think we can go back to Harry. Let's go back to Harry, shall we? Harry, we cut you off in mid-flow there, and you're about to just tee up for us. I'm also keeping an eye on the Reform news conference, where they seem to have got some some fancy lighting on the go, obviously awaiting the arrival of Nigel Farage. Let's just take a little clip of what you heard from Nigel Farage. Oh, indeed, I think we won't do that. Here he is. Let's have a listen to Nigel Farage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Nigel, on the 3rd of June. On the 3rd of June. Thank you, Dave. Where are you from? Where are you from? Oh, well, that makes sense.
You want to sell off me?
Yes. Are you downwind of me? You've had a bigger lunch than I've had. He must be screaming. He's absolutely steaming, isn't he? That's all right, there's still plenty of beer left in the pub, mate. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye, lots of love. Lots of love. As I was saying, on the 3rd of June,
Nigel, you're a racist. The party's filled with racists as well. People like you divide and rule my ancestors. Now you're trying to divide and rule this country.
It's quite clear that there are several protesters who've made their way into this news conference for Nigel Farage. One's already been escorted out. Well, we just thought that might be a rather quicker resolution to it, but it appears that there's more than one in there. It's interesting they're being very quickly bundled out, as you can see. And we'll rejoin Nigel Farage and see if he can indeed begin the address which we were anticipating.
Oh, do buck up, really, please, love. I'm so sorry. Well, I'm enjoying this.
Well, it seems as though this might be the feature of the first few moments of the address by Nigel Farage. Who knows how many more have been admitted to the hall where he's been due to speak? Should we just see whether he can actually begin?
I mean, this is a reminder.
I mean, we haven't organised this very well, have
the
we?
divisiveness in politics at the moment, right? So many people obviously like Nigel Farage. They've just gone out and voted for him. He's just about to win 4, maybe 5 seats in this parliament. But at the same time, this is the backlash that he's going to face wherever he goes around the country. We saw him have a milkshake thrown at him during the campaign. We've seen all of those accusations about his candidates and some of their views, which have elicited very strong responses from Nigel Farage himself, absolutely categorically denying that his party is racist or homophobic or misogynistic. And you can see he's quite happy to have an argument here with these protesters who've come down and are shouting things like racist, it would appear, from the audience there. So a flavour, I think, of maybe some of the division in politics to come.
I think it's also somebody like Nigel Farage, and it was the same with Boris Johnson. You got the sense that he was very popular, but actually he's very polarising.
Okay, let's just pause. I mean, it's quite hard to tell. I mean, it's interesting that we can see all of the reporters in the room who are covering this event are trying to make sure that they're covering exactly what's going on behind them, rather than angling their cameras and iPhones towards Nigel Farage.
We've seen this before.
This is also a reminder, Julie, of the infancy of Nigel Farage's party, because a very slick political party would have weeded out these people, quite frankly. It's quite rare that number of hecklers would be allowed into an event or manage to find their way into an event.
I mean, pretty substantial security questions here.
Yes, I would imagine so. And he'll be fuming, I would imagine, Nigel Farage, after this. If he wasn't already fuming about the vetting issues that his party's had during the election, he's now got a security issue that he'll be asking questions about.
Okay, let's see if he might begin now.
When I decided to come out of retirement and get back involved in frontline politics, that I had 2 very clear objectives. The first was for us to get millions of votes. The second was to establish a bridgehead in Parliament. And you can see there are 4 of us up here now as we bite our nails with what is going on in Basildon and Thurrock right now, where our candidate, James McMurdoch, on the first count was ahead by 120 votes. On the second count was ahead again, and there is a full recount taking place as I speak. So I'm very hopeful it won't be 4. I'm very hopeful that it will be 5 within the space of the next couple of hours. Now, the results show us some very interesting things. If we had proportional representation, we'd be looking at nearly 100 seats. But equally, first past the post inverts the other way, where Labour get almost the same number of votes they got, well, in fact, fewer votes they got under Corbyn, and yet 200 more seats. It is very much my view that our outdated, first-past-the-post electoral system is not fit for purpose, and we will campaign with anyone and everyone to change this electoral system. That certainly we'll be doing, and we'll make those arguments in Parliament as quickly as we can. The results show there is absolutely no enthusiasm for Starmer's Labour whatsoever. And it was interesting to watch Starmer speak outside Number 10, his first Prime Ministerial address, having been to see the King. And you know, in the course of that speech, he looked down at his notes over 150 times. Once every 2.8 seconds. Now, I don't think these people with me need a script because they know what they believe in. And when it comes to providing the voice of opposition, well, we may be too few in number to necessarily be thought of as the opposition in the House of Commons. But let me promise you something. We are going to be the opposition around the country. We are all committed to working for our constituents. We are all committed to doing the best we can in Parliament. But above all, what we are going to do from today is we are going to professionalise the party. We are going to democratise the party, and those few bad apples that have crept in will be gone, will be long gone, and we will never have any of their type back in our organisation. You have the 100% promise on that. What is remarkable is the energy and enthusiasm of those that have come to us over the course of the last few weeks. They were voting with passion. We organised meetings around the country at 24 hours' notice. The venues were all full. This energy and optimism is being reflected today as one member of the public every minute joins the party. A member a minute is joining the party as we speak. And it really is my aim and ambition to create a mass movement across this country that will change politics for good, that will change politics forever. We've got the energy, we've got the optimism, we've got the enthusiasm, and we will do it. Now, I'd like you, please, to listen to the Member of Parliament for Boston and Skegness, Richard Tice.
So the remarks of Nigel Farage, but you can see on the other side of your screen, then she is taking her time, perhaps enjoying the moment. Rachel Reeves arriving at the door of number 10, almost inevitably, certainly to be appointed this country's first female Chancellor. She'll be going through the door of number 10, as we see it there. There should be residing at number 11. And that is one of those moments, again, that we will come back to and point at an inflection point moment in this election.
Yep, first female Chancellor, and there's already talk in number 11 they're going to have to get rid of the urinal in the Chancellor's private Edwardian bathroom. That's how outdated that place is. So, yeah,
it's about time too, to me.
Well, I'm surprised the staff haven't asked to get rid of that. It's the private bathroom, then technically it's only the Chancellor that's allowed to use it. Again, another sign of how antiquated our system can be at times. But, you know, this is Rachel Reeves' dream job. When she was growing up, she told Anushka recently she had a poster of Gordon Brown on her wall as Chancellor as he was then. She's an economist by trade. She's an expert in her field. She's also worked in private banking. So, you know, this is her passion, actually, economics. She's been criticised in the past. It upset her quite deeply, actually, when she was called boring snoring at one point by another member of the media, accidentally got leaked. And she was very upset by that. But she she, I think, has sort of embraced it and said, yes, she is quite a serious politician. She's not interested in being flashy. Some people might find that a bit dull, but, you know, she ultimately is in charge of some fairly dull figures. She's got to go through a lot of spreadsheets in the Treasury, and she needs a serious head in order to deal with some public finances which are in a dire state. She said she wants growth, economic growth, in order to sort of grow our way out of the hole that we're in as a country fiscally. But that is a tall order, and really the pressure is on her, among all others now, to deliver. Shabana Mahmood going in there to Downing Street as well. So she was Shadow Justice Secretary, so presumably she's getting a bump up. It'd be a little bit early, you'd imagine, for a Justice Secretary being called. Maybe she's been given another role. A couple of members of the Shadow team are no longer with us. Thangam Debonair lost her seat. And also Jonathan Ashworth lost his seat overnight, so perhaps there's a new role for Shabana Mahmood. She is Muslim, and I say that because that was an interesting feature in the election last night, with the vote going to independence for the Labour Party. Maybe Keir Starmer thinks it would be a real boon to have a Muslim MP in a very high-profile position for him to help with that issue as well.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things that we're talking about, this massive Labour majority, but yet there are some caution signs, and one of the caution signs for Labour was that its vote share was down in areas of the country with higher Muslim populations. And of course they've been very aware of this for a long time. It's not just about Gaza, it's also about economics. Anushka was also talking about how the kind of the platform for that had started earlier, the loss of voters in Muslim areas, deep concerns over all kinds of economic circumstances, not just Gaza.
John Healey going up to the door of number 10 now. He was Shadow Defence Secretary. Presumably he's heading to be Defence Secretary, about the right sort of time of day for a Defence Secretary to be walking up that hallowed street. So John Healey, Yorkshire MP, long-standing MP, been in Parliament for a couple of decades or so, was a big figure under the Ed Miliband shadow cabinet, actually, and has remained this sort of survivor of politics.
So some significant figures, as we were anticipating, already in number 10 Downing Street, as Keir Starmer starts to form his cabinet. We will have to adjust our descriptions of these figures who've been shadow cabinet. They're now straight into the jobs and straight to work. Well, we are going to take a short break now. We will say goodbye to STV viewers who'll be able to watch a roundup of the re-election results in Scotland next. For everyone else, we will have lots more to come, and we'll see you again in a moment.
Damage is definitely something I'm worried about. It has shea butter in it, which I'm excited about. My hair feels soft with the product on. Love it, absolutely love it. The colour, the feel of my curls, it's amazing.
Change your mind and your hair colour for good by Garnier Naturally.
You know, I didn't think I could sell my car because I've got outstanding finance.
Yeah.
We Buy Any Cars just sorted it all out for me. I'm getting the soft top.
Just sold my car
to We Buy Any Car.
Just sold my car to We Buy Any Car. Just sold my car to We Buy Any Car. Just sold my car.
To find out how much your car's worth in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
Fed up of germy cages in your toilet? Introducing the new Harpic Hygienic and Fresh stickers. No germy cage and no plastic applicator. Flush, press, count to 3 and it's done. Is it magic? No, it's Harpic. Get a fragrance boost with every flush. New Harpic Hygienic and Fresh stickers.
How do monthly donations change lives? Thanks to you, we've helped double cancer survival in the UK, which meant she could get back to what she loves. We found out how to make radiotherapy more precise, so he could find his strength again. We helped develop tests that uncover cancer earlier, so she could celebrate more milestones. But every 2 minutes, someone in the UK is diagnosed with cancer. Your donations keep us researching month in, month out, so that in the future, more people will hear.
It's gone.
Set up a monthly donation today to protect moments like these. Together, we are beating cancer. Donate monthly at cruk.org/donate or call 0300.
Scotland, get ready. Now is the time. The Advance Group Red Hot Summer Sale is here, and you won't want to miss it. With double glazed windows starting from just $395, and you can spread the payments for up to 50 months, interest-free. And with our 15-year guarantee, now is the time, Scotland, to improve your home. The Advance Group Red Hot Summer Sale, now on. Search advancegroup.co.uk.
The £15 million jackpot must be won this Saturday, or thousands of you will win a share of the prize. But who will it be? Maybe Pat, thinking his numbers don't look spread out enough. Or Helen, who's now wondering if she should play. It's 15 million, Helen. Of course you should. The £15 million jackpot must be won this Saturday. Lotto, will you be next?
A very good afternoon this eventful Friday on STV, where at 3 o'clock now we're joining John Mackay for an STV election news special.
This afternoon, a landslide Labour victory. The Conservatives crushed and the SNP invincibility breached in Scotland. It has been an election of generational change, and we have a new Prime Minister. Labour seal a spectacular landslide victory across the UK. Scottish heartlands are reclaimed.
Our work is urgent, and we begin it today.
Anything but the Tories was always my policy going into this. It's like anybody but Tories.
People have called for change. We now have big change.
It has been a nightmare scenario for the SNP, reduced to 9 MPs. The soul-searching begins.
I have to accept that we failed to convince people of the urgency of independence in this election campaign. We need to take the time to consider and to reflect.
Here in the North East, humiliation as Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross fails to get elected, but 5 do retain their seats.
I'm John Mackay. This is the STV News Election Special. Good afternoon. The UK is a different place today, and so is Scotland. For the first time in 14 years, there is a Labour government in the UK. The Conservatives and the SNP have been the big losers. The new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, says the work of change will begin immediately. Conservative rule has not just been defeated, it's been trampled into the ground, attacked from all sides by Labour, the Lib Dems and their defectors Reform. The outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak told the nation he was sorry. In Scotland, it has all changed too. The SNP have endured a night of huge losses, from being dominant in UK elections, winning almost all Scottish seats less than 10 years ago, the third largest party at Westminster indeed. They are now a rump party of only 9 MPs. This is what the political map of Scotland looked like before that historic vote yesterday. A sea of SNP yellow across much of the country as the party continued its domination of Scottish politics. But last night it was all change. An incredible night for Scottish Labour, and much of that sea of yellow turned red, particularly in the party's old Central Belt heartlands. And here's the detail behind that change. This was the landscape in Scotland in 2019. The SNP were by far the biggest party with 48 MPs. The Conservatives had 6, Labour had just a single MP, and the Lib Dems were on 4. But a dramatic reversal of fortunes has just taken place. An absolutely disastrous night for the SNP, who now have only 9 seats. The Scottish Conservatives have performed better than their UK counterparts, retaining 5, a net loss of just 1. But the big success story is, of course, absolutely clear. Just look at that Labour vote. They now have 37 MPs, a massive increase on last time around. The Lib Dems gained 1 seat last night, returning a total of 5. How does that impact across the UK as a whole? Well, again, looking at 2019, this was the makeup of the Westminster Parliament amongst the 4 main parties, the Conservatives with a clear majority. But now a huge Labour landslide means they have nearly doubled their seats to 412. The Conservatives have collapsed to just 121. The Lib Dems have made big gains. They're up to 71, while the SNP have just 9. So many questions from this new political landscape. How will Labour govern? What now for independence? Can the Conservatives ever recover? And what will be the relationship between the new UK government and the current Scottish one? We'll bring you answers to all these questions over the course of the next hour. And our political editor, Colin Mackay, is with me in the studio.
Labour's big promise at this election was change. They've delivered the first step. They've changed the government. Now they have to deliver the kind of change that makes a difference to people's lives.
Lots to get through. Let's start with the story of how Scotland voted. The winners and the losers from the political correspondent, Ewan Petrie.
After 14 years, Labour is back in Downing Street.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation.
Following a landslide victory, Keir Starmer promised his government would serve everyone.
With respect and humility, I invite you all to join this government of service in the mission of national renewal. Our work is urgent, and we begin it today. Thank you very much.
Earlier, Rishi Sunak emerged from number 10 for a final time as Prime Minister.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss.
Rishi Sunak then left Downing Street for Buckingham Palace, where he offered his resignation to the King. He will also stand down as Conservative leader when a successor is found. It was a night of celebrations for Labour. The party's leader in Scotland greeted the new MPs for Glasgow after taking all 6 seats in the city from the SNP.
Look, an absolutely historic day here in Scotland and right across the UK. We have come from our worst result since 1910.
Seat by seat, Labour regained control across the Central Belt. Former Cabinet Minister Douglas Alexander was among those celebrating victory.
Today, people chose hope over despair and dared to believe that our country can be better and that our country must be better.
For the SNP, there were few moments to cheer. Westminster leader Stephen Flynn held his seat in Aberdeen South. But Joanna Cherry was one of 3 losses in Edinburgh.
Now is the time where we must learn and we must listen. We must listen to what the people of Scotland have told us. But when you are knocked down, you have to get back up.
The Conservative Scottish leader Douglas Ross lost to the SNP in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East.
What we knew was going to be a risk here is a reform vote was going to allow the SNP in by the back door. And I think so far this is the highest reform vote we've seen in Scotland, almost 15%. And that's a risk. That was what we warned people about.
The Liberal Democrats reclaimed their position as the 3rd largest party in the UK.
This is a tremendous night for Liberal Democrats in Edinburgh, but not just in Edinburgh, across the whole of the United Kingdom. We are going to make a huge leap forward and return as a major force in British politics again.
In the light of day, news of the departures and arrivals in Downing Street was sinking in.
I think he's got a hard job in front of him, the way they turn the country around, you know what I mean?
Well, hopefully they'll do better than the Conservatives did. Hopefully.
And I can't see them doing any drastic changes quickly. I think it's going to take many years before we see changes.
I am announcing a recount.
The result for Inverness, Skye and West Rossshire has been delayed until tomorrow due to a discrepancy over votes. But the overall picture is clear. A seismic night for Labour and big questions now for the SNP and Conservatives. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
We'll go to Westminster in a couple of minutes' time, but first, Colin, a massive change. What's your analysis of how Scotland voted?
This is huge. Labour has won a landslide victory across the UK. In Scotland, their victory is way beyond their wildest dreams. The first Scottish result last night was actually from Kilmarnock and Loudon. Labour won it with a 22% swing from the SNP. That's bigger than the Rutherglen by-election last year. And there were bigger swings than that too, as Labour swept the SNP aside, taking seats right across central Scotland. The SNP used to be completely in control of Glasgow. Last night, Labour painted the town red. They've painted much of central Scotland from Ayr to Alloa and beyond red now. It's been a while, but this is what Scottish politics used to look like about 20 years ago.
And Colin, what happened to the SNP?
This is the SNP's worst election in a decade, but it probably feels even worse to them because they've got into the habit and they've felt used to winning all the elections. In the run-up to this election, they feared that if Humza Yousaf had been leader, they might struggle to get beyond single-digit figures. Well, that's where they've ended up. So they're struggling to actually understand how that's happened. I mean, they knew it would be bad. They just didn't think it would be this bad. They thought that John Swinney would be able to draw a line under it. They just hoped that he would draw the line a bit higher up. And, you know, they still managed to get 30% of the vote, but that's down 15%. They've gone from the 48 seats to the 9 seats. And the last seat to be declared will come tomorrow. That's Inverness and Skye. And it looks like the Lib Dems are going to take that from the SNP too.
For the moment, Colin, thank you. Well, let's go to Westminster now and Paris Goutsianis. So, Paris, a new occupant in number 10 and a very different Westminster.
Absolutely, John. The shock is still settling here. And to follow on from Colin's point, one of the big changes is, of course, the SNP is no longer the third party. That was a huge platform for them to advance their constitutional arguments. You've also got a massively reduced Conservative Party in number, but also missing some major big beasts. Liz Truss is the first former Prime Minister to lose her seat in over 100 years. You've also got people like Penny Mordaunt, who might have been a major player in a leadership contest to come, who lost her seat too. Then, of course, there's the entry of Nigel Farage. After so many attempts, he is in Parliament and able to, he hopes, pull the strings of the Conservative Party and act as a sort of leader of the right. And you've also got other parties entering for winning many more seats, for instance, the Greens, and also independents who took seats off Labour, one of whom is a certain Jeremy Corbyn.
And Paris, how significant is it that Labour are in, but perhaps surprisingly on a very low vote share, especially among English voters?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just a low vote share, the lowest vote share for any winning party in British political history. I was in Downing Street earlier, and there was a rapturous reception for Keir Starmer as he walked up Downing Street and went into number 10. That rapturous reception isn't necessarily shared by voters who want to see him deliver.
For the moment, Paris, thank you. Well, from Westminster, let's come back here to look in detail at the seismic shift in Scotland, and in particular across the Central Belt, where Labour stormed to victory, reclaiming its Scottish heartland from the SNP. Well, Kellyanne is in Glasgow for us, where they swept the board. And Kellyanne, Labour have been in wilderness there ever since the independence referendum, of course.
John, for the best part of a decade, this city has been dominated by the SNP. But last night, that all changed in dramatic fashion after Labour took all 6 seats here in Glasgow. It's like a return to Red Clydeside, but it's not just here in Glasgow, it's right across the Central Belt that the Nationalists have been swept aside. Our chief reporter Sharon Frew now reports on Labour's revival and of reclaiming its traditional stronghold of Scotland's biggest city.
Surrounded by his new MPs, the Scottish Labour leader couldn't hide his delight. Those preparing to head to Westminster are enough to fill the stage.
And aren't there so many of them?
Change days indeed from 2019, when Labour only had 1 Member of Parliament. Hours after the result, many travelled miles to join colleagues for the Clydeside celebrations.
Huge wave that came across Scotland and right through the UK. We in the Western Isles, we're the Atlantic beacon. We just lit the landing lights for Downing Street. The rest of Scotland was a forest fire of Labour lights.
5 years ago, not many people would have predicted a win like this. After a significant swing from the SNP, Labour have gained every seat in Glasgow and made gains in Edinburgh.
I've had no sleep since yesterday at 5 o'clock. Feeling quite awake, surprisingly awake, just elated and delighted that I've got the opportunity to serve my community. We want to prove our worth and make sure that we deliver for the people that we represent.
We want to heal as a country, we want to look forward and not inward, and we want to have representatives that sit on government benches making decisions rather than protests.
To get the result I got, I knew I'd been working hard out there every day, so I knew that I was speaking to people on the doorstep and that they were coming back to Labour, so it was a fantastic feel last night.
The Scottish Labour leader said the hard work starts now. In this constituency, red once more, they are very clear on what should be the top priority.
We need to try and curb inflation. We need to bring business into the country.
We need some really solid, long-term, strategic action.
It was an open goal for Labour, it really was. But as I say, they've yet to be trusted in my eyes with the economy, so hopefully they can sort that out.
Lunchtime in Saltcoats. Labour supporters gathered to watch the new Prime Minister enter Downing Street.
We have been calling for change. The people have called for change. We now have big change.
It's just so amazing that we're actually here. And I think we'll still be pinching ourselves tomorrow going, did that actually happen? Was I dreaming?
I hope that we bring the change that people so desperately need. He will be the man to do that, he definitely will.
If history tells you anything, they're not going to have long to try and fix this, so they need to do it straight away.
This victory is just shy of Tony Blair's 418-seat landslide nearly 30 years ago.
Tony.
One of those elected in that new Labour wave, who also served in Gordon Brown's cabinet, was Douglas Alexander, now representing Lothian East, after taking the seat from the SNP with a 12,000 majority.
These are truly history-making results here in Scotland, and once again the Labour Party has been given the privilege and the heavy responsibility of trying to deliver on the Scottish people's priorities.
There will be no hooliganism, there will be no vandalism, there will be no bevying.
The late trade unionist Jimmy Reid is etched into the history of Red Clydeside. His granddaughter is now the new MP for East Kilbride and Straven.
Everything that we've done, he'd recognise that we were back in the service of working people, which is what we exist to do. And I know my grandmother's very proud of me, so I think proud all round.
Reflecting on Labour's landslide, a union leader said a new dawn has broken. It cannot be a false one. Sharon Frew, STV News.
So a new dawn in politics with Labour's comeback. But you know, it's not until you look at the colours in the results map that you get a real sense of how much it has changed here. Having been more or less wiped out by the Nationalists in 2015, we got used to seeing this big band of yellow right across the Central Belt, representing the SNP's grip. But after last night, this is how it looks now. Swathes of red for Labour, taking in Glasgow, Ayrshire, Inverclyde, Lanarkshire, Falkirk and Edinburgh, to name but a few places. The SNP totally wiped out here. In fact, the only two constituencies in the Central Belt not claimed by Labour are Edinburgh West, which was held by the Lib Dems, and Mid Dunbartonshire, which was taken by the Lib Dems from the SNP. To think this map was a blanket of SNP yellow until last night gives you the scale of just how momentous this win for Labour is. Well, the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar is with us. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You've described it as an absolutely historic day. Did you expect it to be quite on this scale?
Well, look, if you look at where we were at the last general election, we were in 4th place. It was our worst result since 1910. And then when I took on the leadership 3 years ago, we were 32 points behind the SNP. And so for us last night to have not just won in Scotland, not just be the largest party in Scotland, but to win such a convincing majority is, of course, a matter of great pride for me personally, but also delight as we played our part to make sure we have a Labour government right across the country.
A massive result, but when we were out in Glasgow earlier, many people were telling us, oh, anyone but the Tories. Would you say that there was a lot of tactical voting going on, perhaps a vote against the SNP or to boot out the Tories? Is that what you've kind of capitalised on?
There's a combination of factors. I think clearly there's a demand to get rid of the Tories after 14 years of chaos and carnage. Clearly a demand for change and the Labour government being that change, but also a frustration and anger with 17 years of SNP failure and incompetence, something that's been in sharp focus in particular in recent years. And I think people are really frustrated. They want government that works for them.
You've got a huge mandate, but do you think you'll be able to hold on to that support?
I say directly to people who may have voted Labour for the first time in this election, may have voted Labour for the first time in a long time in this election, I understand your desire for change. We are going to work for you and deliver for you, and that's the approach I'll take, both in terms of what we push a UK Labour government to do, but also the approach I take as we head towards that election in 2026 and we seek to elect a Scottish Labour government.
You say change begins now, so what are your priorities for Scottish people? What are you going to change now?
Number one is people, and I think this often gets downplayed actually, is the huge weight that's going to be taken off people's shoulders knowing that the chaos, division and the culture wars are coming to an end. Getting honesty, decency and integrity back into our politics, having ministers, a government and a Prime Minister that wants to serve the people, not his own interest, and serve the country, not his party. I think you can't downplay the significance of that. But we are going to get to work straight away.
This is a UK election, but are your thoughts now turning to the Scottish election in 2026?
If we're really honest with ourselves, the biggest impact in terms of people's life outcomes and life chances comes in our education system, our healthcare system, our housing system, and all of these levers are in control of the SNP Scottish Government, and all of them broken, fractured on their watch. And I'm determined to set out how we reform our NHS and make it fit for the future, how we get our education system back to being the envy of the world again, and I'm determined to build that case as we build towards that election in 2026.
Do you think you could seize power then?
That's my ambition, that's my intention, but that's ultimately up to the good people of Scotland.
All right, well, it's a day many thought they wouldn't see anytime soon, but Labour is back. Anna Sarwar, thanks very much for joining us.
Kellyanne, thank you for that. So, as Labour have risen, the SNP have fallen. The SNP knew all along this was going to be the toughest of elections. There's talk today of soul-searching, of listening to voters, but the results are brutal. Well, our political reporter Laura Alderman is in Dunfermline. And Laura, the dominant force in Scottish politics reduced to a rump. They've been waking up to a nightmare.
Yes, it's a similar story to Glasgow for the SNP here in Fife. They've been virtually wiped off of the electoral map. Some seismic wins for Labour and the Lib Dems. It's hard to overestimate just how big a change this is for this region. Of course, there's been boundary changes, but back in 2019, the SNP won some stonking majorities. It was a knockout for the party, but today, a very different picture indeed. Let's look through some of those results. We'll start with where we are tonight here this afternoon. In Dunfermline and Dollar. A big swing from the SNP to Labour here, with Graham Downey winning almost 46% of the vote. Over to Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, it's the same story. Labour winning a big share of the vote and taking the seat back from the SNP in Gordon Brown's old backyard, of course. In Glenrothes and Mid-Fife, it was close, but another win for Labour. And finally, North East Fife. This was Scotland's most marginal seat, but Wendy Chamberlain has held it for the Lib Dems with a huge majority and 54% of the vote. So the question remains, where does this leave the SNP? Overnight we saw heartache and trauma and tears for the party, but this morning First Minister John Swinney was defiant. He said he wouldn't resign, and he's only been in the job for about 8 weeks, and he said he would take full responsibility for those horrendous results for his party. Losses were expected for the SNP, but when they came, they were fast and frequent. We saw tears and looks of disbelief and devastation for some.
The party won't recover from this setback until we go back carefully and look at what has gone wrong in the 10 years since the independence referendum.
The party has lost 38 seats and now just 9 SNP MPs remain. It's a far cry from the stomping win secured in 2015. The party was on a high and made gains at the expense of Labour and the Conservatives. But a drastically different morning after has hit the party this time. The First Minister remained defiant.
I have to accept that we failed to convince people of the urgency of independence in this election campaign. And therefore, we need to take the time to consider and to reflect on how we deliver our commitment to independence, which remains absolute.
In the former SNP stronghold of Dunfermline today, voters reacted to the change.
I was following SNP, but I thought they're going downhill now, so...
Did you change your mind?
I changed my mind at the last minute.
It is what it is. Like, the votes, like, whatever happens, you know, it's there. Like, we can't really change the vote, whatever people have decided to do.
When the initial shock passes, the party will face a period of reflection and ask where to go next in their push for independence. Well, we did ask to speak to somebody from the SNP this afternoon, but no one was available. However, Westminster leader Stephen Flynn spoke to STV News last night, and although he was calling for the party to remain united, he did say those results were crushing for the SNP. John.
Nobody's going to shy away from the fact that the SNP is going to have a very, very difficult night. It's going to be a bleak night. Very many of my colleagues who I value, not just professionally, but many of whom are my friends, are going to lose their seats as members of Parliament. That's not a reflection on their abilities. It's not a reflection on their work in Parliament. But they have lost their seats, and it's extremely challenging for all of us. It's a time for the Scottish National Party to come together, to reflect, to listen, to do better, and to ensure that over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years in the build-up to that Scottish Parliament election, that we can regain the trust that we've lost.
And you're going to be leader at Westminster of a very, very small band. How can you have any influence there now?
Well, we're going to have to try our best to make sure that we do what we do best, which is to make sure that Scotland's voice is heard and that we act in Scotland's best interests in Westminster. The Parliament is going to look completely different to what it did prior to the general election being called. We will continue to put pressure on the incoming UK government to do what we were doing with the Conservatives, to reject austerity, to see investment in our public services, to try and get a better relationship with the European Union, and of course to see that investment, particularly from a local level as well, that investment in net zero that is so badly needed in order to boost economic growth. So we will hold the UK government to account, and if there's opportunities to work with the UK government to the benefit of the people of Scotland, we'll try to do that as well.
But where does this leave the whole referendum debate now and independence?
Well, indeed. We know that in opinion polls, roughly 50% of Scots are still in favour of Scotland being an independent nation. We would like to see that number higher. But in order to achieve our aim of independence, you have to win elections. You have to be in a position where you have a strong mandate to be able to deliver the powers for a referendum to Holyrood, so that you can take forward what it is that 50% of the Scots want to happen. We've had a crushing defeat in this election, and that's going to be a moment for all of us to pause and reflect and try and rebuild that parliamentary trust which is so crucial to achieving independence.
The SNP's Stephen Flynn, and thanks to Laura in Fife. Well, the story in the North East and Highlands is a bit different from in the South. To explain it all to us, let's go to Andrea in Aberdeen.
Thanks, John. Yes, here in the North East, the big story of the night was the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross, who failed to get elected in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. It was a huge moment for the Tories here in Scotland, but it really did round off what was a disastrous night for the Conservatives right across the UK. They now have 119 MPs, losing 249 since the 2019 general election, so a huge number. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss, she lost her seat along with other high-profile MPs, including 12 cabinet ministers. Here in Scotland, though, the vote did hold up against Labour. They managed to retain 5 seats, but the Reform vote did have a big impact, particularly in that Aberdeenshire North and Moray East seat where Douglas Ross was standing. So altogether, a catastrophic night for the Conservatives. Here's Stephen Brown.
The fishing town of Peterhead has, for the past few years, been a rather happy hunting ground for the Conservatives. But last night, that changed. The Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross, defeated, in part due to an increase in votes for reform.
He was going to stand down anyway, but losing his seat's pretty sad, it is, because he would have been very good for this area, I feel.
I just didn't trust the man.
I've heard people who voted for reform that's exactly the reason, that through the COVID years, through Conservative mistakes, that reform was the only answer, because Labour never usually is in this part of the world.
I feel Nigel Farage comes across more honest than the rest of them.
Douglas Ross stood in the seat after the party stopped the former Conservative MP, David Duckett, from standing, claiming he was too ill, something Duckett denied. But it was Reform perhaps who did the most damage to Douglas Ross. They gained nearly 15% of the vote in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East.
When we look at it, the 15% Reform vote, that's what changed this election. Reform already had a candidate when David Duckett was the candidate, and they've stood in every seat across Scotland. So 15% of the vote going to Reform has allowed the SNP to win this seat.
Across the UK, it was a terrible night for the Tories. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss was ousted, and the likes of Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps and Jacob Rees-Mogg were all defeated too. The party lost seats to the Lib Dems, and their vote was really squeezed by Nigel Farage and Reform.
It's not just disappointment with the Conservative Party. There is a massive gap on the centre-right of British politics, and my job is to fill it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.
But it wasn't all bad news for the Conservatives in Scotland. The party held the 3 seats it had in the Borders and retained 2 seats in the North East. Before the election, there had even been some hopes of possible gains in places like Perthshire. But as the game fair got underway in Scone today, there was a feeling of disillusionment for some towards the Tories.
It just shows how fed up people are of not getting what they want.
I think anybody that comes in has got a nightmare to try and fix the country.
People have become disillusioned with the Conservative Party, including very strong Conservative supporters.
The question for the Conservatives, both north and south of the border, is what next? Who will lead them, and which direction will they go?
Well, Stephen joins me now. Stephen, you mentioned the Reform vote having an impact on the Conservative vote. Just how significant was that?
Well, in places like Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, clearly very significant, but also elsewhere, the likes of West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, the Conservative vote share there down 7.1%. Reform got 7.1% of the vote share. In other places like Orkney and Shetland, and Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross, the Reform candidate actually beat the Conservative candidate, albeit the Conservatives were unlikely to win there. The Liberal Democrats did win those seats.
We're here in Aberdeen, where energy plays a huge part in people's lives in this neck of the woods. The Labour Party were very clear in their campaign that there would be no drilling licence, no new drilling licences awarded here under their government. And that was obviously very controversial for the energy industry. What are they saying?
Well, absolutely. Going into this election, they keep warning Labour about the damage that might do, and as you would expect tonight, they're saying exactly the same. The industry body OUK saying that they are deeply concerned with the plans to extend the windfall tax, for the potential of no new drilling for oil in the North Sea. They say that could risk jobs, and that they want talks with Labour. But it's also worth obviously been clear that Labour have a significant majority, they can push through their plans. But even somewhere like here where we are just now in Aberdeen South, Labour saw their vote share increase by around 16%, so it's not like the Labour message doesn't land here as well.
All right, Stephen, many thanks. Well, it has been quite a night here in the North East. The big story, of course, Douglas Ross losing his seat. John, back to you.
Andrea in Aberdeen, thank you for that. Well, Colin, we've heard about the big parties. What about the other parties? In particular, we heard Andrea and Stephen talking about reform there. What impact have they had?
You know, reform did better than I expected. Not quite Farage levels, but they got their best result, as we heard there in Aberdeenshire North. 5,500 votes. That's 5 times the SNP's majority over Douglas Ross, when obviously the local voters showed him the red card last night. Now, the Greens did better than they have in previous general elections. At least 3 seats in Glasgow and Edinburgh, where their vote was actually more than Labour's majority over the SNP. Alba didn't make much of a difference at all. They lost their deposits everywhere they stood.
Colin, for the moment, thank you. Well, we're taking a short break, but we'll be back in a couple of minutes with more from Westminster.
Sanex Expert Skin Health Body Wash with Moisture Lock technology deeply nourishes your skin for up to 12 hours, makes it feel instantly soft and hydrated. Sanex Body Wash, certified by the British Skin Foundation. And after, feel confident for up to 48 hours with Sanex Dermo Antiperspirants.
Is your gut holding you back? Try new FiberCalm for gut-related symptoms. FiberCalm forms a protective layer. It not only relieves gut symptoms, but also helps prevent them from returning. So you'll feel like saying yes. Yes to the park run. Yes to camping trips. Be a yes person.
Add cognac. Add Flopper. Bad time for the broadband to go down. Don't worry. You're on full fibre, the nation's most reliable broadband technology. You did switch to Vodafone, right? Switch and save over £200 versus BT's full fibre 2.
When you're setting up a new nest, starting your own flock, or they just keep on growing. Get the flexibility you need with VeryPay. Pay now, pay later, or pay over 3 months and pay no interest. We'll even send you helpful payment reminders. Shop the online store for fashion, home and more. VeryPay. Ways to pay that work your way.
You all right? Have you got your club card?
Mm-hmm.
Club card accepted.
I got the power! Have you got any plans later? I got the power! Receipt?
To own a home at Kingdom Park is to experience a whole new way of living, where there's a real sense of a community, surrounded by natural beauty, and where there's a place for every occasion. Discover luxury holiday home ownership, less than 1 hour from Glasgow and Edinburgh, and find a home for every budget and every lifestyle. We look forward to welcoming you. Kingdom Park Homes. Your kingdom awaits you.
Get really mobile. Discover the Quingo Flight. Using an easily removable docking station in a small hatchback car, it self-loads and unloads remotely in just 60 seconds. It features the Quingo world-patented 5-wheel system for total stability and safety. Infinitely adjustable seating and controls and unmatched manoeuvrability. Get really mobile with a Quingo Flight. Call 0808 100 6570 or visit www.quingo.tv.
On a distant world, darkness marched ever closer. In the hour of reckoning, you stood as one. And all the while, you were vacuuming. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen.
And welcome back to our STV News election special. Let's go straight back to Westminster. Paris Koutsayanis is there for us. And Paris, Keir Starmer taking over. What are you hearing about his new cabinet?
Well, John, the cabinet reshuffle has just begun. We've been told not to expect any significant changes from his shadow team. Despite that, walking down Whitehall just now, we've seen a parade of very nervous-looking shadow ministers waiting to hear if they're going to continue in their jobs. Only 2 roles have been confirmed so far. And Ian Murray is, I hear, walking up Downing Street right now. He, of course, is Shadow Scotland Secretary and would be expected to continue in that role, given that he was the only MP and therefore the only one with parliamentary experience of the crop of Labour MPs. Although I would expect some of those new Labour MPs to potentially be waiting by their phones in subsequent days for junior ministerial appointments. So the 2 roles that we have had confirmed are Angela Rayner, who will be the Deputy Prime Minister. She's been at the right hand of Keir Starmer throughout the campaign, throughout his leadership. She's also going to be responsible for levelling up, so potentially holding the purse strings of funds for Scotland. And also Rachel Reeves is going to be Chancellor, the first female Chancellor the UK has ever had.
And Paris, what do the next few days look like for the new Prime Minister?
Well, the reason why this cabinet reshuffle is happening so quickly, partly is because Keir Starmer has to go to Washington for a big NATO summit next week. So we're expecting the first cabinet meeting to take place perhaps this weekend. We have several days of MPs being sworn in, so no parliamentary business yet. There's the state opening of Parliament where Keir Starmer will have to reveal his parliamentary programme for the coming year. And then the first Prime Minister's questions between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, with their roles reversed, that takes place the following week.
Paris, for the moment, thank you. Well, for most of the last decade, Edinburgh South was Labour's only seat in Scotland, but now Ian Murray, as we saw walking down Downing Street, is joined by colleagues across the Lothians and beyond. It's huge change that will impact how politics and politicians between the devolved government and Westminster interact. Well, our senior reporter Gordon Cree is in the capital this afternoon with a couple of guests who can tell us more on that.
Yeah, John, this is the UK government's main office in Scotland, and if indeed Ian Murray is confirmed as Scottish Secretary, you'd expect to see him here fairly regularly. Of course, across the Lothians, those seats that were yellow have turned red, with the exception of Edinburgh West, which has been retained by the Liberal Democrats. Across Scotland, we've seen the biggest changeover of MPs since 2015. Well, to discuss the implications of this, we're joined by the Equalities campaigner Talat Yaqub and Professor Jim Gallagher, a former senior civil servant. Talat, in Scotland, we now have 20 women MPs and nearly twice as many, 37 men. You founded the Women 50-50 campaign. What do you make of the state of play?
Well, I had the opportunity to co-found the campaign back in 2014, and it's the same issue that we've been talking about that entire time, that if parties do not proactively reach out to women, particularly marginalised women who are otherwise often disenfranchised and furthest away from politics, you will not see them making decisions of this kind that are needed within our politics and hopefully creating feminist and anti-racist politics that decisions that we need. We had 19, we've had a great increase of 1, and that's with the boundary changes of 2 fewer